certainly, I mean, there's lots of faculty members whose work doesn't have anything to do with industry. So many parts of the humanities, I'm an English major, I'm married to an English professor. Our backgrounds don't lend themselves very well towards working with industry. There are other parts of the university that are very clearly working on industry relevant problems. I would say in the medical center, by and large, at every medical center in the US, the problems are directly relevant to the medical device field and the biopharmaceutical field and others. And so they are very clearly engaged with industry. Similarly, in some fields like mechanical engineering or computer science, electrical engineering, in some ways, there's a much more porous boundary between the faculty members in those fields and their industry counterparts. And I can come back to talk about ways that those interactions happen. The challenging group in some ways are the scientists working on truly fundamental basic research discoveries in the sciences, but perhaps in fields where the applications of those to industry aren't immediately obvious. So I would say we work with researchers in the Department of Physics or Astrophysics, in biology or chemistry, in statistics or math, or some of the computer scientists who work on more computer science theory and less on applied work. But so my point being, I think there's a real range of levels of interest in working with industry. And the challenge is for the researchers who are not already motivated to work with industry, how do you incentivize them to do so? I think that's, I'm sure at each of your institutions, there are some faculty who are very interested in launching startups or very interested in working with industry, but it may just not be as many as you like. So this question, and by the way, I'll keep talking, but if you have questions, jump in. There's been a lot of talk about this in the US, about how do you get more researchers engaged in working with industry? And there's been a variety of proposals that have been floated. So for instance, there's a group of institutions that are lobbying to have patents and inventions and startup companies count towards tenure. Be considered as part of the tenure process when a faculty member is being considered for tenure. I don't think that's anywhere close to the norm, nor is that something that Columbia is considering, nor most of our peer schools. So the sort of direct incentivizing of faculty by having industry and commercialization count towards tenure is under consideration, but is not by any means the norm.
So it's not mandatory right now, but is there an incentive system? I mean, like cash rewards, less teaching, or extra points? How do you do it at Columbia?
So there's, at least at Columbia, there is no less teaching. There is no less of a responsibility for writing grants or publishing papers. It does not count towards your tenure process. It does not count towards your promotion criteria. There are, however, other rewards. So for instance, Columbia, when my office, I run the tech transfer office for Columbia, for context. When we do a license to a faculty member's technology, the inventors of that technology share in 20% of any money that comes in. So our office has generated over $3 billion in US dollars licensing revenue. And 20% of that has gone to individual faculty members, postdocs, and graduate students, if they were an inventor on the technology. So it is a little bit like a lottery ticket, because by and large, that's certainly not the expectation that there will be a huge economic return. But there's the promise that it could be. So that's one incentive. The second incentive that is, yes, Bart, go ahead.
Yeah, do you remember maybe the origin of that process? Because for example, at my university, the scientists receive at least 50% of the income.
50,
but we
50.
Yeah. But we have, you said 3 billion. It means for me that we have 4 zeros less income. So.
Yeah, you froze, but I think I got the gist of your question. So in the US, under the Bayh-Dole Act, so the federal law that created tech transfer, the US universities are obligated to share the license revenue with the inventors. However, the ratio at which they do so was left up to the individual schools to determine. And so
in Poland, it is also the same, but we have to share at least 50%. So we have the same, but that's
yeah. So in the US, I would say the norm is around 30%. Like the typical university sharing ratio is 1/3 to the faculty, 1/3 to the inventors, 1/3 to the central university, and 1/3 to someone else. It could be the provost, it could be the dean, it could be the department chair. At Columbia, back in the early 1980s, the faculty senate created the ratio. And if someone reminds me, Jacob, maybe if you send me an email, I'll share, I have a pie chart that breaks it down. I can send it to you. But they gave, instead of giving 1/3 to the inventors personally, they gave 20% to them personally and another 20% to their labs. So there's research funding for them. But it has to be spent in their labs at Columbia. So essentially they took the 40% and divided it in half between personal and lab. And that's actually going to get to my second. So my first incentive is the promise of personal riches. The second incentive is the potential for research funding for their labs. And so that can come either from, at Columbia, that can come from the 20% share of licensing revenue, because that could mean you never have to write a grant again, hypothetically. Or it could come from funding from industry. So we are actively in discussions with startup companies, medium-sized companies, and large companies about funding research at the university in fields of interest to them. And so we have an incentive for faculty labs to want to work on with industry in order to get funding for their projects.
Orin, just one question. If you collect revenue directly from business, do you have to to apply as, if you want to spend those money, do you have to conduct tenderings, or you can just spend without any limitations?
Who is the you in that scenario? Is that the university or the faculty?
Okay, I mean, your laboratory gets some money from licensing. So I would like to buy something. Can I buy it like from a free hand, or I have to obey certain rules to buy something?
It is money that goes into the lab account, and they can spend it however they're allowed to spend lab funding. Without
any procedures for procurement, no
limitations?
Well, I mean,
whatever they would normally have to go through for procurement in their lab, they still have to go through. But they don't have to go ask someone for the money.
If I may, because I was wondering, you have 45 full-time staff at your Columbia Technology Ventures. This is a TTO for the rest information. And I've checked, you have like 6,600 full-time faculty members and research staff at Columbia. So my question is, if you would like to change the attitude of some scientists that do not cooperate with business, you said about the money incentive. For me, it was surprising that that it doesn't count to promotion criteria. So how can you effectively convince scientists to cooperate with business, not only in terms of extra money?
Right. So actually, I was getting to that next stage. So there's personal money, there's lab money, and then there's access to data sets or access to equipment, or access to in some cases, access to real world problems that they and their students can work on. So sometimes the incentive isn't financial at all. The incentive is that some companies in the U.S. have access to unique assets that we can't get hold of. This is not a real world example at Columbia, but imagine Netflix. If you're a computer scientist and you're working on, or an economist, or a behavioral economist, or a psychologist, and you're working on questions around like consumer choice or predictive analytics. Getting access to the database of the watching habits of all of America on Netflix is a unique data set that you might not be able to get otherwise. Or it could be the results of a clinical trial or something like that, or a library of compounds from Pfizer or Merck or Genentech. So there may be assets that you can only get if you're working with industry. But I think at the heart of your question is we have no mechanism to force anyone to, not only do we not have a mechanism to force them to work with industry, we don't have a mechanism to force them to even return our calls. Like faculty are their own bosses, basically. So there are faculty who want to work with us, and there's other faculty who are just not interested in patenting or licensing or startups or industry, even if their work is highly relevant. And that's okay. But what we see our job is creating the opportunities for labs that are interested in doing so to be able to pursue patents and licensing and startups and industry collaborations, and marketing that opportunity as heavily as possible within the university, so that if someone's choosing to not do it, it's because they don't want to. It's not because they don't know it exists.
But
I think at a place like Columbia, we are blessed in a number of ways. We are blessed to be in New York City, which is a global commercial hub. And so we have a lot of industry in our backyard. We have a very practically oriented group of faculty. We have a university president, Lee Bollinger, who has explicitly talked about what he calls the fourth purpose, which is the idea that in a modern university, there's always been teaching, there's always been research, there's always been engaging with the community around you. But the fourth purpose of a modern university is to ensure that your ideas are having an impact on humanity today. And so we, as a university, we are very focused, I think, on impact, and that helps as well. But there are still people who don't care, and that's okay. We don't force them to.
Okay. So Krzysztof, could you last question to this section, if you can?
Sure.
Yeah, my question was, if you are one of the choices or the only choice if somebody wants to work with business? Is it possible, for example, to establish a startup company without your support directly from the faculty?
It depends. So at Columbia, in our office, we have 20 to 25 startups that launch every year based on our intellectual property. So software or patents. If a faculty member or a graduate student wants to start a company that doesn't use Columbia's intellectual property, they can go do so. So we don't stop, or if they want to consult to someone else's startup, or company, they're welcome to go do so. In fact, we're fine with that. They have to go through our office if it is based on university intellectual property, like intellectual property developed in their labs. In our office, I think because Columbia has been so supportive of our mission, we have, Jakob, you mentioned that we have 45, it's actually more than that. It's around 40 full-time people. And then we have 35 graduate student interns and 7 lawyers. It's a very big team. We've been staffed sufficiently so that we have bandwidth to be able to be helpful to people, even if it's not based on university IP.
Okay, so, I'm going to ask you later in this third section about where are you in the strategic, construction of the university.
Sure.
I will get to this, but can we move to the results and how value for the market they are? Because sometimes in Poland, research projects are carried out in small teams on topics alongside market needs. So as a result, as I told you before, technology transfer in Poland works efficiently, but our offer is weak. And my question to you is, what do you do? I mean, the university and CTV, your TTO, what do you do to have results that are interesting for the market? What is your role in this process?
Sure. The analogy that my former boss used, and I've stolen from him, is he liked to say that we are hired farmers on someone else's orchard. So we don't plant the trees. We don't control the amount of fruit. Our job is to run around and pick up fruit that falls off the trees and try to figure out what we can do with it. And I think that's a really good analogy, because we have no control over what the faculty are researching. We can try and create opportunities for them to work on industry relevant topics. And we do that by, we bring in people from industry and from venture capital and from entrepreneurship to be on campus and give talks, to visit the faculty labs and speak with the graduate students to help them find a problem that they are trying to solve, as opposed to just an interesting science project. We can set up custom days for, we have some faculty members in fields like robotics, where a lot of the times it's very, very cool science, but it's not really clear what it's actually trying to do. And so we'll sometimes take labs like that and we'll bring in venture capitalists and people from Amazon and other places to try and help the students figure out what they're actually trying to achieve. So we can create opportunities for them. We run a program called the Lab. I'll type it into the chat on a break. We run a program called the Lab to Market Accelerator Network, which is a group of industry-specific accelerator programs that we've had running for a few years now, where we provide little bits of funding in fields like cybersecurity or energy, or we have one running now. It's a partnership with Corning around advanced materials. We have a partnership with IBM to run one of these around data science. We have a partnership with Sumitomo to run one of these around cancer, and with Takeda to run one of these around metabolic disease. So in those situations, the companies are putting up money to say, it's essentially a prize. It's saying, we're looking for good ideas, and if you have a relevant idea for us, you can get this research funding for your lab and training from us and mentorship. So we're creating incentives for people to work on industry relevant problems. But if someone chooses to not do it, or if someone is working on industry relevant problems but is not interested in working with industry, that's fine.
Okay, Orin, but are you okay with this metaphor of catching the plants from the trees? Because you have the full knowledge about the market, you know the business needs, the company's needs. And if you see the gap, and if you like to inspire some scientists at one of your faculties, can you go there and say, guys, we see the gap, do this? Or you just don't do this because you have those plants to catch?
We don't do that. I would, but I think it's for a different reason. It's actually a question of philosophy, not lack of ability. So, when we're asked by the deans or the department chairs or by a faculty member, what are some interesting problems that I can work on? Can you help connect me with industry? Then we're all over it. But I think we very much philosophically, as central, and we'll come back to this later, perhaps, Jacob, in your later question, as centrally located as we are in the university, and as much as the university does seem to value tech transfer, innovation, entrepreneurship, we are very much the tail of the dog. We're not the dog. And I think, to me, that's actually a perfectly appropriate place for us. I would never dream of telling the faculty members what they should be working on, or to tell them that they're working on a problem that's too philosophical or too future oriented, because that's how some of the world's greatest discoveries have come about, is because people, the stories of people researching Arctic snails and coming up with a cancer cure. Or we've been filing intellectual property on photonics, on graphene, for decades, and it's only finally becoming commercially relevant. So sometimes the faculty that are working on things that are so far in advance of the market are, the issue is they're working on the problems of 2 decades from now, not today. So the challenge, though, is that the university needs to provide enough funding to the Tech Transfer Office to be able to actually file patents and hold those patents for long enough for them to become relevant. Because if you've got a super constrained patent budget, then you could be sitting on very, very valuable intellectual property, but have to throw it away or only file it in Poland and not in the US and Europe, not the US and UK and Japan and South Korea, because you don't have the budget to do so. So, it's all kind of interwoven, but we definitely don't tell faculty what is commercially relevant and have them work on it.
Tail of the dog. Okay, Krzysztof, Bartek, would you like to comment on that?
I would like to ask a question because there is a difference between an idea, so there is no result, you have to work to provide those results, and the results. So do you go to the faculty with ideas, or you are just looking for the results that are ready to commercialize?
So I would say about 10 years ago, we were more looking for the results. So we were looking for ideas that were ready to commercialize. Okay, let me step back.
Because idea is not the result. It's not the result. Yeah, idea is something you have to work on. Yeah,
I understand. So at the small or underfunded tech transfer offices, I think you are forced into a position where all you can do is look for results that are ready to license and where industry is ready to license them. So in other words, ready to license ideas that are on the near-term roadmap for industry, because you don't have a budget to go after the more speculative stuff. And you don't have a staff that is able to, that has the time or maybe the experience or the contacts to be thinking 3 to 10 years ahead. At the larger tech transfer offices in the US that are better funded, you might have the ability to look for technologies that are further away time-wise from the market, but are still pretty well developed. I think what you're starting to see in the last 5 to 7 years at a lot of universities in the US is we are starting to look more for the ideas now. So we have, at Harvard, at Penn, at Johns Hopkins, at Columbia, we have funding now, either from foundations or from donors or from the institution, to go looking, I don't know if the term further upstream, to go looking for earlier stage ideas that are super promising, but are not anywhere ready for commercialization yet, and to incubate them in the university for longer. So for instance, at Columbia, I have a validation fund. So I have a fund at the university that is meant for finding early stage ideas that are not yet ready for commercialization, and then incubating them and doing those so-called killer experiments to get them ready for the market. And if you'll bear with me for 1 second, Jacob, do I have the ability to share my screen?
I guess so.
Okay, let me try that. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet. Yes, now, yeah, we can.
Okay, so I have a validation fund that we have been running since 2007. And this column here is how much money each year I have deployed on what Krzysiek has called the ideas. They're not just ideas, but they're ideas that are not yet ready for licensing. And so in each year, the way to read this is the amount of money we deployed. This is the number of awards that we made, and this is the outcomes. And so what you can see here is overall, we've invested $5 million in these projects. And so far, we have brought $25 million back into the university from that investment with very, very high rates. So essentially 70% of these projects went from being unlicensable to licensed because of this funding. So it has been a very high return on investment, both financially and scientifically, but it's only enabled because we have access to this kind of validation, proof of concept funding to take those ideas and turn them into results.
Orin, how, on average, how long have you to wait before the revenue, goes for this idea? So if you invest into the idea and then you have to wait for 3 years, 5, or how many years before the revenue starts to be generated?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually have data on that. I will show you. By the way, Jakob, is it okay if are you okay with me showing a couple of very quick slides?
Of course I am.
Okay, so let me share a different screen. So hold on one second again.
We just have 10 more minutes and we have to go to the business issue. It's the
That's
last
fine.
one.
You keep me on track, Jacob. Okay, so basically, we've done data analysis on this. So the data here, as you can see in the footnote, this is nearly 40 years of data. This is every license we have ever done at Columbia. So this first slide looks at how many years on average did it take from when the invention came in till when it got licensed, if it ever got licensed. So this chart is only inventions that eventually got licensed. And so the way to think of this is, how long did it take to do that license? And what you can see here is that to get to the 50% mark, so half of the deals that got done in the first 3 years. But the other half that got done between year 3 and roughly year 8 or 9. So it can take 8 or 9 years to get the deal done, even for things that get licensed. But to answer in the flip side,
just to clarify, what's that 0 point on that chart? The time of investment, the time of the
no,
result?
when the invention is submitted to us.
Okay.
So this is when Krzysiek comes to us and says, I have a new invention to cure colon cancer. That starts the clock.
Okay, so but if you compare this to this fount you were showing on the previous slide, so how many extra years?
No, that's different, because that chart that I showed before was projects that we found here and then invested in order to accelerate them. So they would be faster, but even so, it's quite a number of years. And actually, I think the chart you're looking for is this one. So this chart here shows Columbia's 4 biggest revenue producers. So we have had thousands of licenses, but we've essentially had 5 of them that generated probably 3 billion of the 3.5 billion that we've brought in. It's a highly concentrated business. So this shows 4 of those 5. These 3 here are biomedical. This one is software. And what this chart is showing, the 0 line here is the date of the license. And then the y-axis is money. So how much money it brought in. So what you can see is in the biomedical fields, remember I said it takes between 3 and 8 years on average to license these technologies? Then you tack on another 8 to 10 years before any real money comes in. So you're looking at between 11 and 19 years before any significant money comes in the biomedical industries. In the software industry, it can be a lot faster. And we've had, if you take things like equity, I don't know if that's I'm assuming it's common in Poland. We often will take equity in startups instead of an upfront fee. And equity can often be quite valuable, in year 3 and 4, when the company goes public or gets acquired. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
So let's skip this third issue, because you already said about the strategic position of CTV. So I would like to ask you about the business. Is it in Poland? It is difficult to convince Polish companies to take bold R&D projects with high degree of uncertainty and novelty and so on. So my question to you is, how do you attract companies on early stage collaboration? Can you give us some tips?
Actually, so this is an area where we spend a lot of time, if we are a school that is big believers in marketing. We market everything through every possible channel. So I can show you some stuff if you're interested, but I'll just tick through it first. We have a very, very good website. So I'm going to pull it up because it's, I think, super cool.
I just hope that Claudia will draw this big believer in marketing, because this is cool. I like the phrase.
I am, it feels cheap, right? Because we believe, I think we're largely among friends. This is mostly tech transfer people. I think, we are I really do believe that we are doing God's own work. Like, we're saving lives by getting this stuff out in the market. But the mechanisms by which we are doing that are not fundamentally different from almost any other sales job. Like, it's technical sales, but it's still sales. Like, finding the right customer is hard. Explaining why this has a benefit over the competition is hard. It is a very low likelihood of success approach. Like, the odds that any marketing is going to work are low. So we are huge believers in marketing, and we market everything by every channel.
So what are your top 3 best practices? Tell me, because the website is not selling. It must be something more.
Well, no, we actually do deals from our website, but I would say and actually I do track the source of our leads. So I'm going to put up, I didn't, by the way, plan on sharing slides, but you're asking questions that I happen to have slides on. So, and by the way, if people are interested, I can share, Jacob, if you'd like, I can share my standard slide deck with you, and you could maybe get it to the panelists somehow.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So these are our lead sources for deals. And this is, again, looking at every deal from 2014 to 2020. So the most common, 25% of our deals, come in from the researcher themselves. So when they publish a paper, they talk at a conference, a company follows up with them, and they introduce them to us. The next one is the company contacts us. So I would say about half of our deals are a company finds out about something. Either they read about it in the press, or they hear about it at a conference, or they read a paper, and then they call our office instead of calling the faculty member. And part of that, we enable by the university makes it very easy to find our office on the university website. And if you Google search technology transfer at Columbia, we pop up. But also we work with a lot of journalists and the university communications team to try and get news stories placed about our most promising technologies so that companies read about them and come our way. I'm super active on LinkedIn, and I post about our most promising technologies quite often. And then sometimes that will lead people to call us. We have a marketing team that will create materials for the faculty members to market their own inventions. So, and then maybe they'll call us. Then there's 15% of them come from our licensing team doing direct outreach. So we hire people who have, our people are encouraged to grow their network of contacts within the companies. There are faculty startups. then our website kicks in. It's now low percentages, but it's still, we do 120 deals a year. So these are still 3 or 4 deals a year coming into the website. Some of them emerge from sponsored research. And then the 35 graduate student fellows that I mentioned, every single technology we have on which we file a patent will get a marketing campaign, a standardized marketing campaign put together by our fellows, which goes out to 10 to 20 companies in the relevant space to see if they're interested in licensing it from us.
Is this the field for your students, interns? Because the marketing communication, this is a cool issue to just give them.
Yeah. So, anyone who's interested in the marketing stuff, we share everything we have. So if anyone's interested in anything we do, I'm happy to share it. We have our fellows. So our graduate student fellows program has been running for 15 years now. And we make the training materials for that available to any university that wants them. So our program has now been put in place at something like 20 or 30 other universities around the world because it's very cheap to run and it largely runs itself because the senior fellows manage the junior fellows and do all their own hiring and quality control. So it's largely self-running. So one of the main things they do is this outbound marketing of technologies. They also do, whenever an invention comes into us, the first thing that happens is the fellows create an assessment of the technology, but also a marketing blurb for the technology. So it automatically goes up on our website. And that blurb can be used to market to industry. And that's all done automatically. They also they have access to databases that show which companies are patenting in what spaces. And so they're able to develop a target list of which companies to go after right within 2 weeks of getting the invention in the door. So it's all, and this, we pay the fellows by the hour, but it's cheap.
Okay.
So they're an amazing resource.
So we must stop here. Thank you very much. It was cool. Now we have this 20 minutes Q&A session. And if I may, I will start because I know there is an Association of Technology Transfer Centers in Poland with us. And they asked me about this ULTP. For your information, this is the one-stop shop for corporations and startups to license IP. And Orin, I know this is a fresh thing, but I was expecting an advanced, UX tool where I can tell you about my business and the system will automatically tell me what technology to buy. And does it work? Because I don't think so. Is there can you tell me something about this?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, UTLP, or the University Technology Licensing Pool, is a very, very new program. We've been working on it for 6 years now. And I'll put in the chat the website if you're interested. It's www.utlp.net. Oops, I sent it to the panelists. Maybe someone else can just copy that and send it to the attendees as well.
Sure, I will do it.
Okay, so we don't know whether this will work or not. It's an experiment. But the idea is there are fields where a patent or a small handful of patents really fully describes the true innovation. Like in biopharma, a new chemical compound can be described in one patent, and that one patent can be worth billions and billions of dollars on its own. There are other fields where the pace of progress is going to depend on thousands of patents, not one patent or 2 patents. So for instance, in my iPhone here, you can't see my iPhone there. In my iPhone here, there's probably thousands of patents that read on the iPhone. So what's happened, I think, over the years, at least in the US, is the big tech companies have become highly unwilling to engage in licensing discussions with Columbia or Harvard or Caltech or Cornell, because we'll come to them and we'll say, I have a patent, or I have 2 patents that would be interesting for you. And they say, and they've said this to my face, interesting, but unless I can license your patents and Harvard's and Caltech's and Penn's and Cornell's all at once, I'm not going to license any of them. Because if I start negotiating with you, then I'm going to have to go through sequential negotiations with everyone else, and I'll never launch my product. So instead, you should just sue me. And then if you have the guts to sue me, then we'll talk. That's a terrible outcome. That is just a bad lose-lose outcome. So what we have been doing is the idea here, it's more like a supermarket than it is a high-tech matching algorithm. We've assembled what we think are the 200 or 300 critical university patents relevant for autonomous vehicles from these institutions. And we're going to the tech companies that use them and saying, you can get all these 200 patents with one license, as opposed to having to go to each school individually. That's all UTLP is. And we're doing it first with a small group of these 15 universities in the US, quite prestigious ones, but still only 15. And we're doing it first only in certain fields. But if it works, then we will expand the number of universities and expand the number of fields.
So for now, the login is hidden for your companies and your startups, or can I just enter it from the website?
There's nothing in the website right now.
Yeah, I know.
No, but there's nothing hidden. It's not, there's nothing there.
Okay. I was really trying hard to find something.
No, there's nothing there. There's nowhere to go. I mean, right now, we know what the patents are, but this is not going to be a technology-enabled business. This is going to be the licensing team at car company X speaking with our licensing team about licensing the bundles. This is not going to be there's no science, there's no, data processing, machine learning, whiz-bang algorithms.
Okay, I get it. So we have this 15 minutes now for Q&As, and there's a question you already said about it, but I will ask you because it's interesting. CTO is a group of experienced sellers. What personal competences you gather in CTO team? Direct scientific knowledge or marketing skills? Can you just make more of it?
I take it the CTO is what we call the TTO.
So yeah, sorry, it's of course, yeah, it's your
okay. And so there's a very active debate about this in the US about hiring. And so there are institutions that believe, very good institutions, that believe that you should only hire people from industry with a technical background who have been in business development or an alliance management type role. So basically, scientists mid-career from industry and who have some marketing or business development backgrounds. And I'm sure that they are probably right. That is not our philosophy at Columbia. We pretty much only hire PhD scientists who have graduated from a PhD program or a postdoc within the last year. Like, we hire very young people, well, very junior career people with deep technical expertise who have a personality that we think will be a good fit for who can learn. We think it's easier to teach people marketing and sales than it is to teach them understanding how scientists think and how academia works, and to have that cultural fit. Those are harder. So in our office, we tend to hire people quite young, but we almost only hire people who have gone through an internship program like the one we run, whether it's Columbia's or from Johns Hopkins or from UNC Chapel Hill. But then they've been doing this for a few years and have a much better sense of what the job really is. And at this point, I would say the majority of people we hire are actually from our own fellows program, because we've been working with them for 3 or 4 years by that point, and we know exactly who they are. Okay. So that's how we hire, but there's different opinions on this.
Another question is about sponsored research from private sponsors and foundations. The question is, to whom the results belong to? Does it mean that the sponsor pays at the beginning and the results belong always to him?
Yeah. So it's a great question. The answer is really it depends. So there are and to some degree it depends on the amount of money. But generally, if an industry sponsor is putting up a significant amount of money, they are at least going to want an option to license whatever emerges from that and whatever background IP would be necessary. So typically, we would do a sponsored research and option agreement whereby the rights would be transferred. There's no ownership transferred, but they would have the option to license anything that emerges. In some cases, the industry may want to predetermine the commercial terms, or at least a range of commercial terms. And so we'll do that as well if we need to. But that's the vast majority. If it's small amounts of money, sometimes they don't really care. But that is typically, they also will usually want, not always, but they'll usually want a non-exclusive license for internal research use only. So not the ability to put the IP into a product, but the ability to use anything that comes up for their own research purposes. So those are all moderately standard depending on the field.
Okay, another question. I don't think I get it, but let's try. Do you facilitate investments in the innovations in Valley of Death Valley? You know, the moment how do you gather money for this kind of scientific results?
Yeah. I need to make it to the market. Yeah, that is our what's called the Lab to Market program. Hold on one second. I'm gonna share another slide very briefly. And again, if one of the panelists reminds me later things I said I would send, then I'll send these along. So I mentioned that we run this program. If you look here in the lower left corner, you'll see the URL. It's the labtomarket.columbia.edu. So we run a bunch of these accelerators for exactly that purpose. And what these are is funding for teams that have a really promising technology that needs to make it out into the market and it needs a little bit of funding to do so. But for at least at Columbia, what we don't do, so all of these funds are funds very early on in the company's life. It's really to get the company formed and to validate the science. What we don't do, which some universities do, but we don't, is to fund the startups to help them launch and grow. So at Columbia, our philosophy has historically been that in a place like New York, there is ample commercial funding available. There are lots of venture capitalists. There's lots of industry. And so if a startup can't raise funding from the market, then we're probably not the right people to step in and fund that company. Maybe they shouldn't get funded, maybe. But we don't want to become the funder of last resort. So we don't do that. I think in the US, there are universities that will fund those startups, but they tend to be in regions that don't have a lot of venture capital activity. Because then you could sort of say our ecosystem, our local ecosystem, is missing that funding piece. And so the university might step in. But we don't believe we have that problem.
You said about it, but there's a question. Do you have so-called, it's called that in Polish, professor's privilege in Columbia? So does the invention made by a faculty belongs to the faculty or to the university? What is the IP rights policy at Columbia?
At Columbia, and I believe at every other university in the US, the IP belongs to the university. There is no faculty, there's no professor's privilege. If it is not, I think I mentioned this earlier a little bit, the exceptions are if a researcher at Columbia invents something that is not related to their Columbia research, then we will typically waive it back to them if they'd like it back. So if they are neuroscientists and they invent a cybersecurity algorithm that has nothing to do with their grant funding, and they did it on the weekend, and they ask us for it back, we'll give it back to them. Similarly, if they submit an invention report to us and we decide to not file a patent on it, then they have the right to ask for it back and we will give it back to them. But if we choose to commercialize it, it's ours. And that's true, I think, at every university in the US.
Okay. Another question is about patents and fees you have to pay. How do you determine which markets to cover with patents and how long keep the patents alive?
Yeah, that's tough. I mentioned earlier that at Columbia we have a very generous support from the university. Partially, I think, based on philosophy, and partially because we've generated a lot of financial returns. So we are not under the same kinds of pressures that other universities are. We can file patents fairly generously, but every time it's a case-by-case decision. I mean, at the 12-month mark, we have to decide whether to file only. If we filed a provisional, we usually file provisionals, but only on about half the patents. So about half the inventions will get a provisional filed. And then 12 months later, we have to decide how many of those to keep. And we keep most of the provisionals, not all, but most, typically in the US only, but sometimes we will file a PCT for 12 months. At month 30, when we have to make the international decision, we will usually just file in the US unless there's active commercial interest, because we have the privilege of being in a large market already. So if it's going to be a global blockbuster, no one's going to skip the US because they don't want to take a license from us. It's just too big a market. But if it's a very promising technology, then we will usually file in the EU. If it's very promising, we might add China, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Australia. We very rarely file past that.
And there was a question about the methodology you used to choose which one and how,
Methodology is putting way too nice a term for it. We don't, I mean, most of my team has been with us for a long time now. I think the majority of our licensing officers have been at the university for 10, 15, 20 years. But every patent decision, not just filing the patent, but every conversion, every maintenance fee, every office action gets a review by our whole patent committee. And we have patent counsel look at it. We have the licensing officer look at it. We get feedback from the marketing people about how the marketing's been going. And then if it's over $1,000 to make the decision, then my head of licensing, Dr. Ofra Weinberger, and I both need to sign off on it. So, okay. But there's not really a methodology. It's not like there's an algorithm or a science. It's a
similar question to this. How do you evaluate commercial potential of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what we're doing during those decisions, but it's an art, not a science. I mean, there are universities that have, where a very ambitious PhD student or faculty member has created some complicated modeling software, that does Monte Carlo simulations and comes up with valuations, and we don't believe those work. I don't know. If there was a way to evaluate, I mean, I have slides on this too, but if there was a way to predict, we can usually tell when something's going to be worthless. So that's pretty easy, although I frankly wouldn't know. Maybe we were wrong and I just never found out because we'd already thrown away the patent. We can usually tell when something's going to be great because, if it is, especially in the biomedical fields, if it's a therapeutic for a disease with no existing therapeutics, like, we're going to file that hard. But there's a lot of gray space in the middle. And, I really do believe, like, our single biggest revenue earner at Columbia generated more than $1 billion in revenue just from one patent our single biggest revenue producer at Columbia was licensed to one of the world's largest biopharma companies. And they tried to make it work for 2 years. And then they returned it and said, we don't want this, it doesn't work. And we relicensed it to a startup company, which got bought by another big pharma company. And that's gone on to be underneath a huge number of blockbuster pharma products. So, like,
Okay.
we could have thrown that away when someone came back and said that didn't work. I don't know.
Last minute and last question. This is hard. Your approach to sub-license fees. How do you envision added value of spin-off companies? Would you like to have rephrased this question?
I'm going to answer the first part of that because I don't actually understand the second part of it. We owe in our sub-licensing, and by the way, if anyone here would like a copy of our license agreement template, I am happy to share it. You can see all of our terms. You can use whichever ones you like. We're not proprietary about it. For sub-licensing, we always insist on a pass-through royalty. So we get our royalty rate whether the company sells it or whether they sub-license it to someone else and they sell it. We're still going to get our royalty on end sales. It wouldn't make sense to get a royalty on someone else's royalty, because then you're going from, let's say, a 3% royalty on sales to a 3% of 3% royalty on sales, which is, 30 times smaller. So we always insist on a pass-through royalty. We also typically we and everyone else in the US gets a percentage of non-royalty sub-licensing income and NRSI, non-royalty sub-licensing income. So if, for instance, if someone sub-licenses Columbia's IP in exchange for a royalty on sales and $100 million in an upfront payment, we will get a percentage of that upfront payment, as well as our pass-through royalty on sales. And that's pretty standard. It's not easy, like companies don't like it, but that is market rate in the US.
Okay, and that's it, 60 minutes. Orin, thank you for your time. It was a great pleasure for me and for us. And let me sum up this meeting in your own words, because I really liked it. We are saving lives by getting science results on the market. Cool, this is a motto of what we do. So thank you very much one more time. And we will ask for all the things you promised you can give us.
Anything really anyone wants.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. I would like to just show you one more thing. Unfortunately, Orin went, but Claudia, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. And let's share the screen.
Okay.
It happened. It escalated so quickly, but hopefully. I would also like to add one thing that you, Jakob, said at the very end. I didn't catch that. You said we're saving life, and then what? We're saving life through what?
We are saving lives by getting science results on the market.
Okay, that's long. I thought I'm going to do it like really fast, like 3 words. So please write it down to me, and I will also add it to the whole picture. So that's what I was able to catch. It wasn't easy because I'm still on my jet lag and thinking with maybe 7% of my brain. But here's what
you are so dark skinned.
Yes, I know, but doesn't matter. Okay, please, Jakub, send it to me through Bartosz or through chat, whatever. I will add, and then we might share it with Orin and all.
Yeah, of course. I would like just to thank you, Jakob and guys, and to our patrons, Koalicja na rzecz polskich innowacji, Instytut Ekonomiczny PAN, o czym jeszcze zapomniałem, Amerykańska Izba Handlowa, oczywiście dziękujemy również, szanowni państwo, naszej firmie, czyli Agencji Rozwoju przemysłu, dziękujemy funduszom europejskim, ponieważ częściowo finansujemy ten projekt z POIR-u. W przyszłym tygodniu wszystkich serdecznie zapraszamy na spotkanie z panią profesor Reginą Hertzinger, profesor z Harvardu i guru od zarządzania systemem opieki zdrowotnej, co w dzisiejszych czasach jest tematem ważnym. Może się czegoś nauczymy. Dzięki wielkie, to było bardzo inspirujące. Kuba, Krzysztof, Bartek, dziękujemy, że byliście z nami. Bardzo się cieszymy, że mogliśmy ten wieczór spędzić razem.
No i Bartosz, połączyłeś porozumienie spółek celowych z porozumieniem akredytowanych centrów transferu technologii.
No zobaczymy to. To jest, wiem, słyszałem, to szorstka miłość, przyjaźń, przepraszam. Ale oczywiście sobie żartuję. Dobrze. Natomiast to duża dawka wiedzy, prawda? To znaczy, to było coś takiego. Jak podoba mi się to, że Orin też się bardzo chętnie dzieli. Zapraszamy do kontaktu. Trzymajcie się, śledźcie Winnovators.Club na Facebooku, na LinkedInie, lajkujcie, nie to jak to się mówi, subujcie na YouTubie, tam jest dużo naszych filmów. Do zobaczenia. Trzymajcie się.
Do zobaczenia.
Wszystkiego dobrego.
Jesteś jeszcze?
Jestem.
I nasi uczestnicy jeszcze są chyba.
Poczekaj, połączmy się za chwilę, bo jeszcze ma zadzwonię do ciebie, dobra?
Dobrze.